Good morning, everyone. I'm just watching as everyone's arriving on Zoom, and it's fantastic to see all your lovely faces. I've got a screen down here, hence me looking down. Have we got everyone in now? Yes, that's fantastic. So to kick off today's event, first of all, I'd like to say thank you for coming. It's been a long time in the development, and I'm really thrilled to see everyone in person and on Zoom. And to kick off the event, we have Uncle Alan Madden, who is our Gadigal elder, to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Once again, my name is Alan Madden, Gadigal elder. For my first song, married man, 10 children, 26 grandchildren, and 17 great-great. Yes, we did have TV. Just couldn't afford the bloody electricity. Born and bred in Redfern, the capital of Sydney. Gee. Follow Manly. No. Money man. Welcome to country to me is always an honour and a pleasure. Just to give you a little bit of an insight of where you are and who we are. As we've all welcomed the countries, firstly, I'd like to acknowledge our First Nations and traditional owners of the lands that you may have come from or work upon, and pay my respects to all our Aboriginal elders, all elders, past and present, also pay my respects. To all our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters, from whatever Aboriginal or island nation you may have come from, welcome to Gadigal. And to all our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters here today, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. No matter where you've come from, whether it be across the seas, across the state, or across town, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. And as I've mentioned many times before, was, is, and always will be Aboriginal land. Only three things shorter than that: coming, taxation, and going. It's an honour and a pleasure to be here today to welcome one and all to Gadigal. Gadigal is one of 29 clans of the Eora Nation. The Eora Nation is bounded by nature's own, the Hawkesbury River to the north, the Nepean to the west, and Georges River to the south. And in between those three mighty rivers is the Eora Nation. And in that nation, there are 29 clans. And the clan's land we're on today is Gadigal. On behalf of members of the Metropolitan Local Aboriginal Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, once again, a very warm and sincere welcome to you to Gadigal. There's an old Aboriginal saying out there, and I think it's very appropriate for you mob here today. They say, where there's a will, there's relatives. So once again, on behalf of the Land Council and of the Gadigal mob, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Uncle Alan. And how can you follow that? Apart from to pay my own respects to the Aboriginal elders on which on the lands on which we are all coming from today. As Uncle Alan says, we're on the land of the Gadigal people, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, and to every Aboriginal person here present. And I think today is a really good day to be thinking about you know, the lands that we are on and what this really means to us as people. So first of all, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Lynn Monroe. I'm the convener of Warren-Yara, which is the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Sydney Health Professions Education Research Network, and the convener of today's event. I'm an English settler in Australia, and alongside my English ethnicity, I have a mix of German, Welsh, Swedish, and Norwegian ancestry. So hopefully through that, I might connect with some people here online and in person. Warren-Yara is the Gadigal word to mean to seek. And today we seek to safely engage in a form of cultural praxis. So I'm hoping that this is a safe space for everyone. And I think that together we can create this safe space. We'll be blending theory and lived culture and social action with a self-reflective sensibility to raise our awareness of how our own values, biases, social position, and self-identity categories impact others around us, and often uphold the status quo in terms of power relations. This morning, we aim to facilitate a more contextualized understanding of oppression and cultural identities and develop a much deeper awareness of the constructs of cultural consciousness, cultural humility, and critical allyship. We also aim to take this further this afternoon as we engage in a World Cafe inspired activity, bringing our heightened awareness to consider what this means for remote, regional, and urban service learning. We aim to come away with some actionable points and to take this forward and to further related events in the future. The genesis of today's event relates to our current visiting fellow, Eora Johnsen. Eora came with us from Norway, and her intention was to connect with and learn from researchers and educators across rural and remote healthcare educational campuses. She visited Orange, Dubbo, Broken Hill, as well as networking across key healthcare professions, education research centres, namely Warren-Yara here, Hsieh in Melbourne, Prideaux in Adelaide, and CG-MERC in Taiwan. And we'll be hearing a little bit more about Eora's travels very soon. From here, we began talking about the great emphasis that is put on cultural consciousness, particularly in remote and rural educational spaces, but more generally across her Australian experience. Following that, we were really fortunate enough to be able to work with Marcelle Townsend-Cross and Julia McCartan to develop the content of today's event. And I guarantee you will have at least one light bulb moment during today's conversations. I can tell you I experienced multiple in the development of today's event. And I understood the constructs deeper and deeper and in more actionable ways. So before I share the running order of events, let's go through a few housekeeping notes. I think we've got a slide. Isabel, do we have a slide? Oh, so the most important thing to remember about today's event is that it has been designed as an in-person and online blended event. And we debated for a long time about how this was going to happen. We decided that to bring people online really in the room, that we wanted to actually, when we do breakout rooms and have conversations, we wanted them blended as well. Now, that's a very adventurous decision. Technology is always an issue in these places, and I can tell you that technology has already started to be an issue for us today. Those in the room will have a little chuckle about this. So I really want you to bear in mind, if we have any technical issues, then stick with us, right? Okay, because we're learning in this space. So those of you in the room who have got laptops on, you need to keep your Zoom microphone muted and also your laptop muted when we're in the main room. But when we move into the breakout rooms, you can unmute your Zoom. Okay. So we encourage you to keep your cameras on at all times so that we can see you. For those in the room, we're asking you to wear a mask if we're huddling around in a small group. At the moment, it's not too busy, so I'm feeling that everyone feels comfortable not wearing masks. But if you don't feel comfortable, please say, and we will put masks on. So a few housekeeping things for those in the room. The bathrooms are across the foyer. And there are emergency points. Essentially, I feel like I'm an air hostess. I'm gonna, if in the event of an emergency, the lights will guide you to an exit. Well, they won't, but you'll see everyone running towards the exit. There's an exit to our left. You do need to press the green button to get out. I discovered that yesterday. There's an exit to our right where you don't need to press any green buttons. We're asking you to consider sharing your and your cultural background and displaying this on your Zoom. So I can see Sarah Crook has done a really nice example. If you want to have a look at that, then that would be fantastic. And you can also share those that information in the chat. So to rename yourself online, you literally need to click your name, right mouse click it, I think, if you've got a right mouse, and you go down to rename, and it's quite simple there. When we break out, essentially your table host will be the conduit through which we will communicate. It will be mostly this way just because of our technical issues. You know, we want to streamline it. We want to be able to make this work. So all the questions will be fed through the table hosts, who will pop questions, etc., in the Q&A at the bottom. But we'll come to that a little bit later, nearer the breakout rooms. We've got Twitter happening. So here's a hashtag CCC event. If you can copy in at Sydney Warrenyara, that would be great. You can copy me in and I've got a chance to retweet, etc., and comment. That's great. Let's have a chat through that medium. That would be a really great place to have a chat. I also think if there's anyone online who wants to take photos of things that are happening and send it to us afterwards, that would be awesome. I never got a chance to kind of approach anyone. So put your hand up and take some pictures, and that would be fantastic. Okay, so I think we're moving on now to Ida's video. So first of all, we're going to play a video from Ida about her visit to Warrenyara. Ida Johnsen, as I say, is our visiting fellow from Norway. She's a clinician. She's doing her PhD in remote spaces, shall we say? I think that's probably the simplest way of putting it. You can never put a PhD in more than in 2 words, right? And she's going to talk a little bit now about her experience at Warrenyara.
Hi everyone, I am Ida Johnsen, PhD student from Norway, where I was born and have lived for most of my life, and my ancestors are of Scandinavian descent. The past 6 months I have been a visiting fellow in the research network Warrenyara, and I'm so happy that I've been able to work here on Gadigal country. I acknowledge that we're on Gadigal land today, and I would also like to acknowledge the people of the countries I have visited during my stay here in Australia and pay my respects to elders past and present. As this is a hybrid event, I extend that to the traditional owners of the countries where you all work today, and to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here today, both in person and online.
Sorry, we don't have any sound in the room here, which we tested earlier and it was fine. So bear with us. It's already started.
One of those things. Try one more time.
We're going to try one more time.
I'm going to share from this computer. if you don't mind.
I don't know if you can.
It's this one, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And then I'm
Hi everyone, I am Ida Johnsen, PhD student from Norway, where I was
hold on, I
born
need
and
to
have lived for
share.
most of my life.
Hold on. One moment. There's a few steps, isn't there? And share screen.
And they share sound and
There we go,
optimize. Yeah.
Yeah. There we go.
Optimize was it? No, this one. Okay,
It'll be
let's-
fine. All right.
And my ancestors are of Scandinavian descent. The past 6 months, I have been a visiting fellow in the research network Varanjara, and I'm so happy that I've been able to work here on Gadigal country. I acknowledge that we're on Gadigal land today, and I would also like to acknowledge the people of the countries I have visited during my stay here in Australia and pay my respects to elders past and present. As this is a hybrid event, I extend that to the traditional owners of the countries where you all work today, and to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here today, both in person and online. In this presentation, I will provide an overview of my time as a visiting fellow. All the photos that you see here have at some point been agreed upon sharing by those in the pictures. So my PhD project focuses on rural medical education, and the main purposes of my stay here were to connect with and learn from and with researchers and educators across rural and remote educational sites in Australia, as well as research networks in Australia and abroad. And this presentation will only be a brief summary, but I'm more than happy to share more about my experiences, so if you are interested, please do catch me in a break. I will chronologically go through my activities during my stay here. So I arrived in Sydney at the end of September last year. After some months of planning and several Zoom meetings, I was very delighted to finally arrive in Sydney and meet my local supervisor here, Professor Lynn Monroe. During the first weeks, I got settled at Camperdown, I presented my PhD project to the Varanjara network, and I also visited Lynn in Katoomba and got to meet her dog and to experience the Blue Mountains. My first visit to a rural medical degree stream was to Dubbo in October. First in Dubbo, I attended the Western New South Wales Health Research Network Symposium, which was such a great introduction to rural healthcare and rural health professions education research in Australia. Here I attended a workshop, Aboriginal Community-Led Research YARNUP, which addressed cross-cultural learning and how Aboriginal communities can lead, govern and benefit from research. And this being my very first meeting with rural Australia really gave me an incredible introduction to the great emphasis that is put on cultural consciousness in this space, and is something that I have brought with me throughout my entire stay here. I also visited the School of Rural Health, Dubbo campus. Education Support Officer Julia Wild gave me a campus tour and provided extensive information about the Dubbo MD stream. Thereafter, I had 2 visits to the School of Rural Health at Orange campus. Here I got to experience wild kangaroos for the first time, and I was warmly welcomed by the educational team who happily explained to me about the Orange stream. Dr. Pip Southwell introduced me to the regional training hubs that work to provide support to medical students and trainees that study and live in rural settings. And it was really inspiring to learn about this network and to see the great effort that is put into addressing and coping with the healthcare workforce maldistribution in rural and regional Australia. I also attended the clinical supervision workshop Teaching on the Run, which was led by Dr. Heather Russell and Dr. Philippa Southwell. In December, I attended the Early and Mid-Career Research Network Showcase, in which I actually got the chance to present my own research. I also participated in workshops and attended other researchers' presentations, and I even got to test out de-escalating an agitated patient using a VR headset. In January, I got on a train and got the true experience of rural Australia on my trip to Broken Hill. I was warmly welcomed and hosted by Professor Hsieh Randall, who arranged for me to meet with researchers, education support officers, hospital staff, and medical students, to mention some. We were given a tour at the Broken Hill Hospital and saw the real consequences of rural health profession workforce shortage, as we learned that several wards actually had to close down because of lack of staff. I also had the pleasure of meeting Aboriginal Project Officer Mariah Goldsworthy. We had some really interesting conversations, and she taught me about the cultural education course Respecting the Differences that is offered to and actually mandatory for all students training in Broken Hill. Next, I visited 2 research centers, the Monash Center for Scholarship in Health Education at Monash University and the Prideaux Center at Flinders University. At Monash, I met researchers Dr. Julia McCartan and Dr. Sarah Michaeljohn. Among others, I learned about their work and had the chance to exchange experiences of being, in their case, former, and in my case, current PhD student, and partaking in research group networks. At Flinders, I met with Professor Lambert Skuwich and his team. I got heaps of advice on successfully running a research group. I also met Dr. Nicola Parkin, who has evaluated the Doctor of Medicine rule stream at Flinders, work that coincides with some of the work that I'm doing in the Norwegian setting. Last but not least, I got the amazing opportunity of traveling to Taiwan and visiting the research group Shandong Medical Education Research Center, or CG-MERC, in Linkou and Kaohsiung. I was incredibly well received by Dr. Hsieh Chang and his team in CG-MERC. My stay here was certainly very eventful, both in academic and cultural terms. In Linkou, I learned about ongoing research in CG-MERC and shared experiences about medical education in rural settings with both educators and also students. And furthermore, I got the chance to present my PhD project and hold a workshop on a qualitative analysis method. I also traveled to Kaohsiung in the south of Taiwan, where I met a lovely group of clinicians, researchers, and students who shared their experiences with healthcare delivery and education in rural areas in Taiwan. And just for the record, this is not beer, but of course the famous and really good Taiwanese bubble tea. There was also some time for exploring both in Taipei and Kaohsiung. And here you can see me with Stella, staff in CG-MERC, and Dr. Wang, who took me on a cycling tour in Kaohsiung, which was a wonderful way of seeing the city. So this was a brief summary of my time as a visiting fellow in Varangiara. And finally, I would like to touch on a few key learning points that I'm left with after these months. First, I have realized the immense value of exchanging experience and learning from each other. When we want to do something new, chances are quite high that someone else has already some experience with it or with something similar, which we then can benefit from. Second, the importance of being aware of and respecting each other's cultures, thus applying cultural consciousness in practice, has been a common theme throughout all of my visits. And this has indeed broadened my perspectives, and I believe that this is actually essential for all areas in life, both professionally and privately. And finally, I have become aware of the value of applying strength-based approaches. So focusing on strengths, abilities, and capacities rather than just the shortcomings and the problems. And I believe that by combining these 3 elements, we can achieve great outcomes together. And last, I would like to take the opportunity to say a huge thank you to everyone who has contributed to making my time as a visiting fellow a fantastic experience and a memory for life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ida. I also have another thank you to do before we play our next video, and that's to Maya, who is our technical person here today, who has literally saved us a dozen times before 10 o'clock and is taking over control of the tech. So I feel like I'm in safe hands because you're not in safe hands with me with its tech.
Ladies and gentlemen,
I also want to say hello to some people online. We've got a few key people online I'd like to say hi to. We've got colleagues over from across the seas in Canada. So there's a few names I'd like to mention here. First of all, Ian Scott, who's the director of the Centre for Health Education Scholarship in Vancouver. I noticed that Kevin Eva is online as well, who's also at CHES. And we have Stephanie Nixon as well online. Now, Stephanie features later in the day, but I also know that she may not be able to stay online for long enough. So I don't know if you want to just give us a quick, maybe a thumbs up or a hello or something so everyone can see you. Really, really appreciate you coming here today. Our next video is from Chang'an Medical Education Research Center, and it's Ming-Ju Hsieh. Ming-Ju is chairman of the School of Medicine at Chang'an Memorial Hospital, an associate professor and a thoracic surgeon. So without further ado, I think we'll play his video, and he's going to tell us a little bit about some of the cultural things they're doing in Taiwan.
Hsieh come from Chang'an University, Taiwan. Taiwan, located in the middle of East Asia and on the edge of the Western Pacific. Compared to Australia, Taiwan is a small island. Australia is 200 times the size of Taiwan, but has similar population. Taiwan included a main island and many subsidiary islands. For example, there are 90 small islands in the Penghu Islands in the Taiwan Strait. In 2000, Taiwan ranked second in the World Health Ranking by the British Economist magazine. In 2007, the Lushan School of Management, Taiwan's healthcare infrastructure, ranked 13 in the world. Although Taiwan is small, there is a high mountain in the center that separates the large plain in the west and the narrow Rift Valley in the east. Western Taiwan have 5 municipalities and 21 of 22 medical centers. Inequality between urban and rural areas does not only occur on two sides of the east and the west. There are well-trafficked infrastructure in the west, but inequalities still happen on the mountains, coastal, countryside, and the subsidiary islands. Chang'an University is a hospital located on the edge of the northern Taiwan, Taoyuan City. There are still huge mountains and the indigenous area. Then, remote and rural service learning engagement with indigenous communities is important for Taiwan and Chang'an University too. This is a curriculum map for Medical School of Chang'an University. The red marks shown on this map are the curriculums or activities related to remote and rural service learning engagement. This activity distribute from years 1 student to final years of clinical rotation. Let me show you the curriculum or activity briefly. Initiatives practice in volunteering work 1 credits, years 1 to years 2. This program is to cultivate the skill and the emotion toward community services. Community medicine for 1.5 credits in years 4. Community medicine course combine the knowledge and the technology of public health, clinical medicine, family medicine, and community medicine with community clinics, community health center, group medical practice center, and regional hospitals. Hospice cares design 2 credits for years 4. This course aims to guide students to explore hospice care-related theory and important concepts through interdisciplinary faculties, not only lecture and in classroom, but on-site visits are also arranged to the hospice world and observe how to provide spiritual care, whole family meetings, and pay visits to home-based hospice care. Family medicine is arranged 2.5 credit for years 5 and 6. National or international clinical exchange program is arranged 4 credits in the next year of clinical rotation. This program is clinical training course for students to apply for participation in well-known universities or hospitals at domestic and abroad. I also start a USR course named Health Issue and Consulting on Aboriginal in Taiwan for 3 years, and include pre-departure lecture, on-site service, and post-service reflection. Extracurriculum, service link club, hidden curriculum are also important for students in rural service learning engagement. For example, Rokada Indigenous Medical Service Team. Rokada Indigenous Medical Service Team is a voluntary student-run health care service learning group from Chang'an University that expanded a lot of pre-departure preparation and medical education for junior students. We also seek out others for collaboration and planning with our students. There are senior and role models on the mountain. For example, Dr. Gao, he devoted to rural medical service over 30 years, who was the vice capital of Rokada 7 years ago. Now she is PGY2 resident in Chang'an Memorial Hospital. In this study, she found that first, tension and contradiction as driver of change. Second, explore good story, use appropriate method can achieve good result. Cooperation and teamwork is important. In the end, it's worth to extend learning in medical education research. Take-home messages are listen and change. Keep improving. Continue to grow with students. Keep work and cooperation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ming-Ju. And I just want to say we're very proud to have 7 of our Chang'an colleagues here with us in person today, including Ming-Ju. So welcome, Ming-Ju, and the co-director of Chang'an Medical Education Research Center, Ida Chang. So hi, Ida. And I think we might have almost have Ida online, another one of our technical issues this morning. We've got one more video to share with you before we get stuck into the conversations, and I'm really keen to get stuck into the conversations. This video is from Sarah Crook from Lismore and Sue Randall from Broken Hill, and they've got a very unusual presentation, which is the doodly. Is it called a doodly? Yes, I've got that right. Sometimes I call it something that I shouldn't call it. Doodly. And I think we're playing it now. Is that right? No, it's playing in the room now. I do love these technical problems. So we'll be playing it any second now online. Yes, and they're going to introduce themselves in the video and the history and what have you. So I won't say anything more, and we'll just go straight into the video online. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Is the microphone working? Yeah, okay, that sounds really weird to me, but so so now we're getting into the conversational side, and I think you're probably all ready for a conversation, having had the last 5 minutes or so reading intensively. I do love that. I know, no apologies. I totally love it. I found it hard to keep up at sometimes, but it was really well worth it as I followed you. So thank you for that. So first of all, I'd like to introduce our co-chairs for today. We've got Marcelle Townsend-Cross, we've got Julia McCartan and Joe Gwynn. And the way that we're going to do our conversation this morning is they're going to introduce themselves, and then we're going to talk a little bit about how they got to this place through PhDs, etc., and even practice. And finally, we're going to have a conversation about critical consciousness. Is that right?
Yes.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, Marcelle, and ask you to start. Do you want to?
Thank you. So hello, my name's Marcelle Townsend-Cross, and pay my respects, of course, to Gadigal peoples here and recognise their unceded sovereignty. And also pay my respects to my Bidapaya Waramai ancestors and relatives and community based around the Taree region of New South Wales. And I always also like to acknowledge my Irish ancestry. My oldest Irish ancestor in Australia was exiled here as a political rebel. And when I learned that, it kind of explained a few things to me. Yeah, I work at the University Centre for Rural Health in Lismore. I've been there for under 2 years. Health is not my background, and I felt like a duck out of water when I first began working at the centre. But I've found my peeps, I've found my feet, and I feel really privileged to be working there with my colleagues. They're wonderful colleagues. We teach medical and allied health students who are on placement in Lismore. The Aboriginal Health Team, we work with them to introduce them to Bundjalung country and to talk about all the important things that allied health and medical students need to know about their professional service to communities. What else, Lynn? Is that about it? Yeah, would you want to tell us about your PhD? My PhD, I was a bit of a late bloomer, lots of kids and caring for family and stuff like that. I graduated from my PhD in 2018. I studied at the University of Technology here in Sydney, and my PhD was about, you just go with what you know. And I guess I've been teaching Indigenous studies in higher education for over 25 years. And most of my students have been non-Indigenous students in the disciplines such as arts, humanities, sociology, political science, as well as education. And so I was very interested in studying how we can make Indigenous studies in higher education more accessible to non-Indigenous peoples. In Australia, there's a lot of Australians who have had very poor opportunities to learn about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples' historical, colonial and contemporary experiences. And so it's about that responsibility and commitment to non-Indigenous Australians to provide rich opportunities in their higher education. So my thesis is published on UTS website, and it's titled Difficult Knowledge and Uncomfortable Pedagogies. And I really thoroughly enjoyed the PhD process. And really, once I submitted, I really felt a sense of grief that it was over. I really loved the ride. So now as an early career researcher, I now have the opportunity to engage in research with my colleagues, and we're doing some really exciting stuff around anti-racism and virtual reality. Yeah, which, you know, Lynn's on our team, which is very exciting. So yeah, I think that's enough.
Fantastic. Julia, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got here?
Yes, thanks. Oh, that's working. I've got one of these mics. So firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the custodians of the land which we're meeting from. It's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and yeah, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So I am a settler to Australia. My dad was born in Northern Ireland, Irish heritage as well. And my mum was born in Germany to Polish parents and came here post-World War II. So I am a first-generation Australian settler myself, and I did some critical reflexivity about that in my thesis, in my PhD, about what it means to be a settler to this land. And started to learn about settler colonisation and what has happened and continues to happen here to this day, and what impacts, the ongoing impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. So I am a dietitian by trade. I studied I finished 20 years ago, would you believe it? And then I've also done a Master of Public Health. So I've largely worked as a public health nutritionist, spanning local government, community health. I've also worked in Central Australia, lived in Alice Springs. I've done some volunteer work in the Kingdom of Tonga. And it was in Tonga actually where I got really interested in food systems and really saw the impact of trade policies and the impact that was having on Tongan people's health, and the influx of really unhealthy food and the shift away from traditional diets. So I've always had a critical kind of lens, I think even since high school, to what I do. I've just had that feeling that the status quo, there's issues with the status quo, and I think I've always had that drive to really delve deeper. And I had the great privilege to do some project work at Monash University with they're called the Guk-Wandruk Indigenous Health Unit. So they're the Indigenous Health Unit for the Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences. So I'm based at Monash University now, and I still do work with the Guk-Wandruk Indigenous Health Unit, and started doing some research into health professions education, particularly about assessments, actually. That was back in 2016. So that's where I got to meet my PhD supervisor, Professor Karen Adams, who's a Wiradjuri woman and professor. And she took me on an amazing learning journey, and really got me to see that there's a real lack of research where non-Indigenous people critically analyse ourselves, and really turning that gaze out from outwards to inwards. I think we'll be talking about that today. So my PhD was very much focused on critical methodologies, and I read extensively from critical Indigenous theorists as well. And I now have finished my PhD. I actually had it conferred in February. So thank you. Haven't graduated yet. But my PhD topic was loosely around food, very loosely. I looked into the Aboriginal plant foods industry in Australia. So we might be familiar with some foods like kakadu plum, which is in all our beauty products now. There's also wattle seed, Davidson plum. There's about 19 of them, which are in commercial use. And one of the facts is that 98% of businesses are actually owned by non-Indigenous people. So my PhD title was Who's Got the Power? A critical examination of the Aboriginal plant foods industry in Australia, or something like that. And that was very much Karen's expertise in being like, you research your own people, don't research us. And that made me feel challenged at the beginning because I'd never done that before. I had to do extensive reading, but I feel so good now that I've done that. And it started to pave this really interesting way forward in terms of learning about critical approaches, which is what we're focusing on today. So I'll leave you with that.
Well, Julia, I just want to say I've had the pleasure of watching you grow through your PhD,
Yeah.
and I was just always impressed. And the very first time I heard you speak opened my eyes to a whole nother way of looking at the food industry and, you know, and these super plants,
Superfoods,
superfoods that come in that we all think we want to gravitate towards, but actually ethically really not appropriate. So that was an amazing eye-opening experience. And so congratulations on getting your PhD.
Thank you, Lynn.
Fantastic. Joe Gwynn, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how we got to be here?
Sure,
today?
thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Josephine Gwynn, and I am a non-Indigenous woman of settler origin, Irish on both sides. Yes, there's a lot of Irish involved. And my father walked off a ship in Newcastle Harbour just after the Second World War. Like a lot of people were, you know, moving around the world at that time, and stayed. My mother's family were effectively some of the first Irish to come to this country. So, and they lived and settled on the lands of many Aboriginal people in New South Wales. I never heard them talk about Aboriginal people at all in their living on the country that they lived on. I had heard about how they loved it. And my mother, just before she died, sent me a note saying that she was so pleased that I had come to love the heat and the dust and the Australian country the way she loved it. So she loved it, they loved it, but they never talked about the Aboriginal people or any awareness they had of Aboriginal people who lived on country. And I don't think that's uncommon for that generation. So I should go back and acknowledge the traditional owners of this land, the Gadi people of the Eora Nation, and their elders past and present. And also I'd like to acknowledge the Awabakal people of Newcastle. I live in Newcastle, commute to Sydney, and unceded land in Newcastle where I live, beautiful land. And I have the fortune to have worked occasionally with the Awabakal people. So my journey began a long time ago, about 32 years ago, actually, when we went to live in remote East Arnhem Land in Australia. And that is up in the Gulf of Carpentaria, the top end of New South Wales, on an island of Australia, on an island called Groot Island, named by the Dutch in their circumnavigation of Australia. No, I think they just went across the top, actually. And Wanadiliagwa country. And that was where my understanding of Australia completely changed. I did not know, and this goes back to my upbringing. I grew up in a very middle class Sydney, fairly comfortable environment, well-educated parents, and I did not know about Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander history in this country. I did not know about the endemic racism that I witnessed in the Northern Territory, appalling treatment of Aboriginal people, and of Aboriginal people that I came to know very well, whose spirit and cultural knowledge and capacity was enormous, but were treated like irrelevant. And so and I worked very closely with the community. We lived in a community that didn't speak English or spoke English as a sort of 5th or 6th language down, because Aboriginal people are very multilingual and can speak many languages. And so that was my learning. And there I sort of picked up practice here and there as an occupational therapist. That's my background, that's my training. And I worked in the community with particular groups of people. So prior to that, though, I had one graduation from occupational therapy, took up an internship, which we had at that time as part of the degree, in a rural area, and realised that that was where I wanted to work. So from about the age of 21, I lived and worked in regional, rural and remote Australia, except for a couple of years here and there in Melbourne. So I've had extensive and living and working, helping set up some of the first UDRHs in Tamworth, including Tamworth. And but since our experience on Groote Island, I've worked with Aboriginal communities. My PhD, I'll cut it short. My PhD, a lot. When you get to my age, there's a lot to talk about.
It's fascinating.
So my PhD started at Newcastle University, where I worked before I came here to Sydney University. And that topic was nutrition and physical activity of rural, Indigenous and non-Indigenous children. And I had, when we left Groote Island and came to Newcastle to live, I wanted to continue to work with Aboriginal people and work on issues of relevance to Aboriginal people. I was particularly interested in cross-cultural communication after what I saw happen in the remote areas to such disastrous outcomes for many people. But I sort of did this sort of sway into a completely different topic on the back of another project where the Aboriginal community was asking for someone to do some work on the factors leading to diabetes in community and to try to prevent children from growing up to get diabetes. So that's led me into, unlike your PhD, a very unknown area, nutrition and physical activity. What do I know about that? But bravely I stepped in. And that was where I worked in that topic as part of my PhD, part of a grant, an HMRC grant that I got at the same time, to develop that program called the Many Rivers Diabetes Prevention Program, which went on for about 10 years. And that was my journey in the governance of research with Aboriginal communities and establishing Aboriginal community leadership, and not a leadership in fact, in action, but also in structure. And that took quite a while. Towards the end of that, I was the research facilitator, but it was led by Aboriginal people, run by Aboriginal people in the communities. I had battles with the university around delivering these surveys, which traditionally were delivered by teachers. I insisted that these be delivered by the community members. The children did not feel safe talking to teachers, white teachers from outside their community. It had to be Aboriginal people from their community. But that time that was not done, and it was a battle to get that happening. But it worked very well. People who were involved with the project have gone on to work in other places around Australia. So I sort of, and how I got here was when I got to Sydney University and started to do some work actually through the Charles Perkins Centre. And then I started teaching again in occupational therapy, because I was an occupational therapist who went underground, as some OTs do, because it's a non-traditional area. It's still around people's occupations, the vital ones of food security and of good health. But I'm only now starting to understand that the place for occupational therapy in those community development sector. There's a very strong role for occupational therapists. We have a lot of capacity to work in those areas, but it's still emerging. It's very strongly in Canada, or more strongly in Canada for the Canadian people online. In Australia, we're still just at early infancy with that.
Thanks, Jo. I feel actually quite humbled sitting next to three very experienced people. I've been in Australia for 3.5, almost 4 years. So I'm still very new to this, and this rich experience between our three hosts is going to be really valuable for today. So I'm just going to let you know how the rest of the morning is going to run. We're going to begin by having a conversation. I say we. We've got Marcelle and Julia and Jo. We'll have a conversation about critical consciousness and what they think critical consciousness means. What does it mean to them? Then we're going to break out into some rooms. So those of you on Zoom, you'll be joining online our in-person rooms in the room today. So in-person tables, should I say, in the room today. And then we'll be doing some questions and answers. The key thing that we are going to ask you to do in the breakout rooms is, having listened to the conversations around critical consciousness, what do you not understand? What's woolly? What's not been said? What questions have you got? And the task of the table host is to identify one question, at least one question, that remains unanswered in that space, And then we're going to come back and do a question and answer process. And then we're going to do that 2 more times, cultural humility and critical allyship. So we'll be listening to conversations around those 2 constructs. Then we'll be breaking out, having conversations about what did I not understand? Where do we go from here? And more questions and answers. I hope that's clear. So without further ado, I'm going to say, well, Marcelle, what does critical consciousness mean to you?
Critical consciousness to me is about, well, what it is something that is essential for us all, regardless of our background, to be able to be the best service providers that we can be. So critical consciousness to me is about understanding the way, or seeking to understand the ways that power works in our societies. So taking off my own blinkers and understanding my own privileges and looking at the ways that power works. I asked my students to talk about or to identify the power structures in our society, and they often come up with, you know, really great answers of, you know, governance structures, our institutions, and so on. But what we tend not to see so clearly, and what is often obscured from our view, are those more ideological power structures. You know, the power structures of paternalism, power structures of class, power structures of race, power structures of ability, and so on and so forth. So I think it's really about, you know, really gazing at oneself, but not just gazing at ourselves. It's not an individual thing that we need to do. It's very much a societal view and a commitment from each of us to become, to come to see what is obscured from our view. Professor Martin Nakada talks about this very clearly, about how we need to seek out that which we don't know. We need to understand what's been absent from our thoughts. And how long have I got? Well, we've got 10 minutes between us. All right. So I'd like to just kind of make my point, if I may, by presenting you with a riddle. And I'd ask that if you know the answer to this, or if you think you know, we're all going to just stay a little quiet for a little while, just to give ourselves time to think, and then we'll share the answer to the riddle. So, a man and his son are travelling along the M1 motorway in Australia between Coffs Harbour and Lismore. They have a horrific accident, and unfortunately the man is deceased on the scene. The son is rushed to hospital for emergency surgery. The surgeon rushes into the operating theatre, takes one look at the child and says, "I can't operate on this child. This is my son." The question is, who is the surgeon? And I remember the first time I was presented with this riddle, it was a long time ago, and I could not think of the answer. And I thought, oh, it's a trick question. It must be a priest. It must be an Aboriginal family who have different ideas around kinship. And I refused to be given the answer. I was determined to get it by myself. And my 6-year-old son came home off the bus and said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Oh, you know, well, Janice has given me this riddle and I'm trying to solve it." And I told him the riddle and he got it right away. And I was, you know, fancy myself as a strong woman who loves feminism. And I could not get the answer to this question. So would someone like to offer the answer?
Surgeons of women.
It was his mum,
Okay.
right? But for many of us, that idea, even though we see strong women leading countries, being surgeons, you know, and doing wonderful things, those ideological power structures of gender and patriarchy tend to obscure our, even my view. So I think that gives a good example of what I mean by critical consciousness, being committed to seeing what's obscured and thinking of the things that haven't been through my brain yet.
That's a great one. That's a really good riddle. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, thanks, Marcelle. I've heard that one too. You reminded me of that, and I'll take that to class myself. It's good. So I'll build on from what Marcelle said and agree with everything Marcelle said. Critical consciousness is shifting one's gaze. And it's not just about the individual, actually. Critical consciousness must be done collectively, hence the whole design of today, where we're having conversations and we're building from one another. So we're practicing critical consciousness right now. And then in class, I share and ask students to explain the difference between reflection and reflexivity. And I think critical consciousness as well. Reflection can be done individually, whereas reflexivity and critical consciousness is a team effort. And I really agree with what Marcelle was saying in that what the first step of critical consciousness is to simply recognize and to see some of these societal structures which are deliberately been set up to be invisible. So Marcelle's mentioned quite a few of them. A lot of the isms in society, like racism, classism, ableism, patriarchy, which is an ism, but settler colonization is another key one that relates to a lot of what we're going to be talking to today. And in my reading for my PhD, particularly distinguished Professor Aileen Morton-Robertson, she stipulates that the power of settler colonization is its transparency. It's invisible. The fact that it's invisible to settlers of Australia makes it powerful. It's not invisible to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, of course. So I think that's the very first step of critical consciousness, is that recognizing that awareness. And that's what we do with our students, is seeing. And I'm just so amazed that Stephanie Nixon's online as well. And her work, which we're going to show afterwards, is just so great. We've used that in class in helping our students start to see some of the structures of inequality and the different isms in society. And also, to me, for critical consciousness, that's the first step, is recognizing and awareness raising. But the next step, and I think this is what makes it critical, is actually doing something about it and the action that comes along with it. And that's what I learned about critical methodologies, and what distinguishes that as a sort of a qualitative methodology. Sort of interpretivism is more understanding, but critical is actually, all right, we see society is unfair. We understand that the status quo doesn't benefit everybody. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do in policy? What are we going to do in education? What are we going to do in practice? And hence, running today, I think this is a demonstration of action. And also what we teach and what we inspire our future graduates to come away with. So I know I was just reading Paulo Freire last night, who's, one of the fathers of critical consciousness. And I really took that away from his work. It's that awareness, but then the action. So that's what it means to me.
I think that's a really good point, and we were talking about this before, and I feel that when we talk about inaction, we'll bring in Joe now, because you guys are very academic and you know PhDs focusing on this, but Joe's been doing some lived work in this space, and so I wonder if you want to give us a
So the first time I heard the word critical conversations was fairly recent. So it's not an area that I have studied. I've worked a little in critical self-reflection. I've had a university education grant a couple of years ago with Professor John Gilroy, who's a Yuan Man Aboriginal academic here, and we use those tools along with Celine Dion, who's in the and yes, sorry, did I say Dion? Celine Dion. She commonly gets this, I know, sorry. So my work was instinctive learning on the ground, basically, and it started all those years ago in East Arnhem Land. And the stories I could tell you of what happened there that made me built a rage that I don't think has really subsided since, and a sense of grave injustice that had never been dealt with in Australia properly, never been addressed in Australia, and still has a long way to go. And how to deal with that rage, how to respectfully work with people in complex situations, and not be the person who was saying, I've got the idea, this is what we'll do. And learning from the consequences of me doing this. And I have so many things I could tell you about. One, there was a very briefly story, a very clever Aboriginal man who was doing some tutoring with me on this island, and there's been a furore in the community over something, and he had come to me and said that the police had taken his the boombox. I don't know if you know about boomboxes, where they're big tape recorders. The cops had taken it and it was in the police station. And I said, well, they shouldn't have it, go and get it, And so, which is my first thing, I intervened in something I should not have intervened with. Anyway, I went with him to the police station, and I was used to police saying, oh yes, they did what I wanted, just what happened. I didn't realise my position of power and privilege in that, and that was not everybody's experience. Anyway, the police were very unhappy at him turning up with me and asked him for a receipt, which they didn't expect to get, but he gave them, which is unusual. And then they very grumpily went away, got the boombox, came back with the thing and pushed it across the desk. I always remember this, pushed across the desk to him, and they said, and if you cause any more trouble, some will be after you. All he was asking for was his own property back. And then I said, well, the legal aid people are here, they had happened to be on the island at the time. And we went out to the legal aid people, and the cops got in that 2 of the 13 police that were on the island for this small community, completely unnecessary. The police got in the car and drove around the little block that we were sitting on, because we're sitting outside as most things happened. And they went round and round. And I should not have intervened with that. I don't know if that had any impact on the way the police treated him. I know that he left the island some years later and lived in long grass in Darwin, passed away. That I always think of that I intervened what I knew and what was wrong. But when something like that happened again, I went to the elder of that community, of that particular moiety, and talked to him, and he would usually say, leave it to me, leave it to us. So
that's a very, very powerful story, and I'm going to remember that, definitely. We're now moving into the breakout rooms. I think we've got a little slide. I'm going to go and stand at the podium. So I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about how the breakout rooms are going to work. What we're doing is we're randomly assigning everybody to a breakout room. We have 11 breakout rooms with a key facilitator at each room. They'll be staying in the same room all day long. So for the first breakout room is very easy because you haven't been at this room before, but throughout the day, we're going to mix you around and try and get you to meet different people in different configurations. So that's where it gets slightly complicated. So the task is that you can identify one question that remains unanswered. So what's unclear, what's missing, what's not been said. The breakout rooms will automatically close after 15 minutes. Those of you in the room have already been assigned to a table on entry, so you stay where you are. Those of you on Zoom, you will be randomly assigned, and enjoy. Oh, can I speak now? Okay, no. Laptops muted in the room. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Yeah, I don't know how that was for you. It seemed, I think it takes about 3 or 4 minutes. We didn't work this one out for everyone to settle in. Then everybody seemed to be having a really good conversation. Then we closed you all off. So that was, that's a learning point. But hopefully you got to, each of the tables has got a question. Can you put your hand up if you've got a question on the table for the Q&A? Did you manage to get a question? If you have, what I'm going to ask you to do is put that question in the chat. Thank you, Isabel. I'm also now going to take a moment to thank Isabel. Isabel has been amazing at organising this event. She's really whipped us into shape and she's super professional and she's telling us what to do. So table hosts, please put your question in the chat. And then what's going to happen is our chairs are going to come up here and they're going to read the chat and tackle the questions, hopefully one by one, or the ones that they can tackle. Questions are good because even if we don't get to those questions in the Q&A session, we can always come back to them. We can triage them, and we can chat about them, you know, later today, or at least in the feedback post event. So I can see some questions coming up, or a question so far. Is that right? We just got one so far. I wonder if I can invite the chairs to come up to the podium to answer those questions. I can't believe they're shy. Come on up.
We're not shy. I'm just waiting for my colleagues to huddle in.
Can we flip up and
You
down?
can see the questions here.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you I
don't really know. I think that's it, isn't it?
Oh, we can.
Yes.
Great.
So if you want to take this over to the read out the question, like this, or are you going to choose which?
Corinne has got a question there. Can you read it out? Yeah, whoever. Oh.
So we read out the questions ourselves? Yep. Yeah. Okay. So we had one from Lambert, table 2. So how do we move quickly from understanding the issues of R&R? I'm trying to think about R&R. Oh, rural and remote. Yes. And various cultures and languages to doing. What do we do as the next step? Move quickly from understanding the issues.
Big question.
From understanding. There you go, Joe. You're the rural remote.
Lambert, could we ask, sorry, interrupting your conversation, but could we ask you to just be a little more specific? Like the issues of rural and remote is pretty big. Lots.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to type fast.
Okay.
But the discussion was initially very much about how we fail to recognize affordances that you have in a certain environment. For example, middle white class or middle class white Sydney inner city, and then when you experience a situation in an entirely different context, that there are all kinds of things that you take for granted, purely from an affordances point of view, what you can do, what the situation, your context allows you to do or to access or to experience. And that's a deep awareness, because when you are in that situation, you think that's normal. That's how the world works. I mean, I had it when I moved to Australia, and the first 2 years I thought they are doing it all wrong here. This is not how it should be done. And then you realize that things change. But it's more and the second issue is that that also holds for your language, because different languages have different things that they consider important. They put different lenses on phenomena. So how do you move from, okay, that's a very nice awareness, a theoretical awareness, but how do you move to, from an education point of view, from a learning point of view, from a development point of view, how do you put that into the next phase where it actually helps you to change your behavior, your experience?
I think what's very common in health is to want to move to action. And that's something that I certainly learnt through my PhD, is the value of spending time in that space of learning, because there's just so much to unpack and to learn. And there's a great history, unfortunately, of health professionals, settler health professionals, going forth, creating action and actually causing more damage. So I think what we're emphasizing today is that value in the uncomfortableness, in understanding the tensions, and then also, as a settler myself, is understanding my place, particularly in terms of health provision. And that's where I've made a personal decision myself. If I were to ever to do work that relates to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's health, I would only do that together with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, under the leadership of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, rather than me leading a project, getting a grant myself, and then rustling up my team of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples afterwards. There's that really unfortunate reality, and that occurs in health. And it's only through sitting with myself, learning and understanding these huge amount of tensions, for me to see that that's an ethical decision aligned with my axiology and my values for moving forward. So that's a step, that's an action in itself, is actually stepping back and taking the time, because that's what's needed in this space. Yeah, that's my
I
insight.
think that's a very valid point. Marcelle, would you like to invite someone else to?
Yes.
A question here relates to, where do we start when we're working with a team who are all at different points of that critical learning journey? And I think that having a team that are at all different points, that's a real strength, rather than a problem to be dealt with. Working collaboratively, I think, is one of the fundamental things about critical consciousness, is that we can't know what we don't know without working with others who can help us to become more aware. So I would see a team that has different, stages of learning in the critical space as a wonderful opportunity and a strength. And I spoke about Professor Martin Nakada earlier, and he talks about how, we need to accept that not all of the problems that we identify can be solved immediately. We have to understand that this is something that's going to take time, and we need to commit that time to work collaboratively so that we can sort of, you know, see through the things that are obscured from us. So I would say that that team is in a place of real strength.
Marcelle and I were just speaking then whilst you were having your conversations about it's a tension within academia, and Alison and I speak about this in our critical allyship, is there's that impetus in academia to be productive and to produce lots of outputs, but it's almost the antithesis of working in this way, which must be really slowly considered and carefully considered. So that's a tension that I'm facing. Yeah.
I'm just going to invite Jo to come up and maybe have a comment. We've only got a couple of minutes left about something that's been said in the chat.
I think that at all times, no matter how long it is that you've worked with communities, to be aware that you're still learning and that you are not, that your cultural pull, I call it a cultural pull, is very strong. So my middle class white cultural pull is very strong. I was brought up in that world, and I constantly have to be aware that that pull can sometimes pull me over. I'm very experienced at working in many different communities, but I know when that happens, because it's a physical feel different and the interaction shifts. And then but this is experience, I know, but I think that's helpful to start with, is to know that your own cultural pull is strong no matter what your experience, and that at every point you do need to be aware that you're on a journey and it never ends. It's not a tick box I've done.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much to the chairs.